Hello, my name is Robin Hoyle, Head of Learning Innovation at Hutchwright International, and this is the second of a four-part video series based on a presentation that I gave as the closing keynote address at the World of Learning Conference, October 2017. The topic of that address was creating an effective learning environment, and in this session I'd like to talk about how change happens within organisations. And as we learned in part 1, change is fundamental to learning and development. We are about enabling people to do things differently and do different things. So change is at the heart of what it is that we do and how we should measure whether or not we've been effective. And so when we talking about change, it helps if we understand what the implications of change are for people and how change really happens. And in order to do this, I'm using a model which was developed first by David Gleichen, and then Kathy Dannemiller took it a stage further, and I learned about this probably about 20 years ago. And essentially what the change equation or change formula says is that you've got to get three things right in order to overcome the challenges that you might face on the right hand side of this equation. The first thing to notice about this equation is that it has some x's in there, and those x's, it won't be any surprise, are multiplication symbols. So in other words, we're going to multiply these things to get the sum on the left hand side of the equation. And of course, if we multiply anything by 0, what do we end up with? Yep, 0. So we've got to have a positive value in each of those three circles denoted by D, V and F, so we better understand what it is that those circles represent. Well, the D represents dissatisfaction. This is the idea that there has to be a reason to change. There has to be something that we're not happy with or we think is not going to work in the very short term. There has to be something which we think causes us to change, and to change now. So why are we changing, and why do we need to do anything like this in a rush? And that level of dissatisfaction needs to be clearly articulated, not just at the corporate level. It's quite easy for organisations to say, we don't like the way we do this, we think we can be more effective or more efficient by doing things a little bit differently. But what impact does that have on individuals? How dissatisfied are they? Because if those individuals do not also recognise that there is something that they would benefit from if it was different, then why should they come along on the journey towards a change? But of course, individuals and organisations live with problems for quite a long time without doing anything about it. So describing the dissatisfaction that one has is insufficient on its own. It needs to be complemented by having a vision for how things will be improved. What will the future look like? What will the new sunlit upland that we will arrive at if we make this change look like, feel like, smell like? How will it work for the organisation in terms of its strategic intent? But how will it also work for the individuals? What will they gain from that process? How will that match their aspirations? How will it enable them to work smarter rather than harder? How will it enable them to gain some rewards for this? How will it enable them to feel satisfaction in the role that they are playing within the organisation? So whatever switches your people on needs to be part of that vision, and we need to communicate that very clearly to people. This is how you will benefit from this process personally. And then our next thing is to think about the first steps. No one's terribly motivated by being told exactly what they're going to be doing every day of the year for the next couple of years. It's important that as creative people we have an opportunity to shape our own future, to influence what will happen to us, and to influence how our life will be in the future. But we do have to get over this initial hump of getting started. And getting started sometimes just never happens because people aren't completely clear about what it is they're supposed to do now. What are the first steps that they have to take to start on this journey? And if we can define those and be very clear about how we want people to move now in order to get towards this change that we envisage, then we've done them a great favour. We've given them a clear understanding of where we're going, and we've also given everybody around the organisation some clarity about what we expect to happen and how we're going to hold people to account for doing things differently immediately. So once we've got a positive value around the dissatisfaction, is there something here that people are dissatisfied with? A vision, is this compelling for individuals and for the whole organisation? And the first steps, is it clear how those first steps fit the journey that we're going on and what people have to do? Then we can start to define the other side of the equation. And you'll see there that we have a greater than sign. So in other words, we have to overcome something. And that thing that we have to overcome is resistance and cost. Now, it won't be unfamiliar to anybody, I'm sure, that change is not always popular. In fact, nobody likes change apart from wet babies. So sometimes we've got to overcome some of that resistance, and that resistance expresses itself in all sorts of ways, doesn't it? People say, I don't have time for this. People say that things are okay as they are. People say it won't work when we get to that stage, and they're not convinced that this is the right direction to be heading in the first place. So we've got to address all of that resistance. From an organisational perspective, we've also got to address the idea of cost. But of course, cost might not just be financial. From an organisational perspective, it may well be, but from an individual perspective, there is the cost of feeling that you don't quite know what you're doing. The discomfort associated with doing new things and trying things out and possibly failing a little bit. The discomfort of one's performance may be dropping a little bit in the first instance until you get used to the new ways of doing things and you can adapt and adopt the new behaviours you've been asked to use. So that cost can be both individual cost, more of an emotional cost, a sense of feeling out of one's depth, but it can also be a financial cost, the real investment that's required to get us there. And we've got to address both sides of the equation, from both a corporate perspective and from an individual perspective. But if we get that right, we start to really enable change to happen with an organisation, because we've started to address some of those barriers. And that will involve us having to speak to people and listen to them, understand the nature of the resistance, because we can't put a value on that and therefore make something which is of a greater value on the left-hand side of the equation unless we've understood what their concerns are, what their worries are, and why they think it may or may not work. I hope you found that useful. We've got another 2 parts in this series to go, and can I thank you for watching and listening so far, and I hope you'll check out the remaining 2 sections.